When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease Comedy channel. We're going to be doing the last Sansa chapter of A Game of Thrones, Sansa 6. And this is the second time I'm recording this, so hopefully it goes better this time. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. We're getting to the last King's Landing POV chapter of the entire book after it's been such a heavy focus between Ned, Arya, and Sansa. This is kind of the resolution to it. It's a pretty good conclusion. It kind of deals with a lot of the same beats as the last Daenerys chapter that we did, as the main focus is really about grief. A lot of it is also about kind of Sansa and how she's going to have to be as a character moving forward and playing the game and all of that stuff. So let's not waste any more time and get into Sansa 6, A Game of Thrones. So we start on page 741. Sansa opens the chapter in grief and in the darkness of her room in Maegor's Holdfast, as she wakes, sleeps, and cries. It's, again, this cycle of grief. She feels almost unable to do anything. Something very comparable if you want to look at just depression. Depression can be something that makes it very difficult to do very basic things of, using all of your mental willpower just to get out of bed. And so that's something that I think, Sansa's dealing with here, even though it is more just grief than it is actually like maybe depression. But there's a lot going on when we think about what has actually transpired here with Ned's death. Not only is it Ned's death, right? Her father, someone very influential, someone she cared about, but you also got to be thinking about the grief that she's feeling about her last moments with her father. You've also got to be thinking about this prince that she was in love with Joffrey, and he's turned out to be kind of not a great guy. Her whole world view is being thrown on its head. Sansa is understandably completely shattered by what has transpired with Ned's death. Servants would come and go with food, but she could not bear to eat, so the food stayed there and spoiled until her servants removed them. Again, she's unable to eat. Grief and depression, all these things do weird things to the body. Some people, when they're stressed out, don't eat at all. Some people overeat. It's just the weird reactions that every individual has towards, strong emotional moments. Sometimes her sleep was dreamless, but she would wake even more tired than before. But those were the best of times. The rest of the time, she would dream or remember her father's death. Yeah, it paints this idea that no matter where Sansa is, if she's awake, if she's sleeping, she can't escape what had happened to her father. It was a horrifying moment for her to view, and she's getting really no relief from that. She had felt safe for a second as Joffrey had smiled at her until he said the words, "Bring me his head." And she didn't remember falling to her knees, but she could not look away. She had wanted to, but she didn't. Again, we see the polar opposite. We always have talked about in this book how Arya and Sansa are complete opposites, but even here in this big pivotal moment, they're also opposites. Arya didn't get to view this, so her trauma is based upon imagining what happened, trying to replay the moment, over and over again with how it actually happened, where Sansa replays what actually happened over and over again in her mind. She could still remember the way his legs had went after he died and the way Ilyn had unsheathed ice. And something that's really interesting is that us, the audience, right? We didn't actually see Ned's death. We kind of heard it more or less through Arya's POV. But in terms of, Sansa, this is the way we actually get to really visualize how it all went down, even though we could pretty much kind of just like Arya, kind of imagine what happened. But here we're really getting to figure out what actually ended up happening. But that gets us into page 742. Sansa thinks that she may die too, and even welcomes it to end her misery. She again thinks of the songs that would be sung of her tragic death and the shame of those who had betrayed her would feel. Again, she's still kind of viewing the world as almost this song. Maybe now it's a tragic song that people would sing these songs about her death, and she'd be this tragic historical figure and all these things, and that's simply just not the way it would be remembered. Just you think about all the tragic deaths that we've seen throughout this history, Fire and Blood, whatnot. It's not usually remembered like that. And it's kind of that feeling that Sansa is in a weird spot, because who knows if she's going to die? If her father could die, why not her, right? And it's also this feeling where she's feeling quite suicidal, right? What does she have left to live for? There's no hope, it seems, of going back to her home and to her mother and her brother. She's a prisoner. She's a prisoner with no friends and no allies. She had once even gathered the courage to go over to the window, but she went back to her bed crying. It's this terrible thing to think about. Sansa going over to a window, presumably to kill herself. It's a very dark theme that George plays with us, and we can understand it, right? I've talked about all the reasons that she'd be feeling such a deep emotional conflict, but she really is in a position where she has nobody she can talk to. She has nobody she can lean on or trust. She's witnessed things that no young child at her age should ever have to witness. And her entire way she views the world is shattered. So I think that's just key to put in your mind as we go forward with the character of Sansa, and maybe the way she treats certain people after this event. The serving girls tried to talk to her, but she didn't respond. Pycelle came calling with his medicines, asking if she was ill and checking her all over, but he gave her honey water and she went to sleep. Again, Sansa's not ill in terms of a sickness. We can all tell that she's just grieving. She has a deep emotional issue right now. And the serving girls, something that we're going to talk about a little bit later after Joffrey visits, but there's another reason as to why she doesn't talk to the serving girls. Because the serving girls are all going to be spies for someone like Varys, Littlefinger, or Cersei. Usually Cersei. So when you think about all of that, there's that other reason where it's like, I don't only want to just not talk to anyone, but also you're going to tell everything I tell to you to someone else. So it's a little bit of that as well. Even once she dreamt of footsteps as she imagined Ilyn Payne coming for her to take her head. He got right outside of her door as the great sword poked in. She woke up, promising she would be good, but there was no one there. Again, Sansa fearing for her life and kind of realizing the role she's going to have to play. This lady that's almost a robot, just repeating lines that she's been told to say. But even this is a dream, right? The way that she hears the footsteps as they get closer and closer. When they did come for her, she didn't hear the footsteps. But it was Joffrey who came for her this time. She could neither tell if it was noon or midnight, but Joffrey drew back the curtains. And that gets us into page 743. Joffrey commanded her to attend him in court today and to dress to fit her station as his betrothed. But Sansa tries to get out of it, pleading to him. But Joffrey notes he is the king now, and if she won't obey, the Hound will do it for her. Again, Joffrey just wants her to play a role. Wants her to be this pretty girl that he's betrothed to, that he can have complete control over and establish his dominance, because he is someone that, himself is pretty weak. And so he's establishing that onto Sansa. But the Hound scoops her out of bed and bids her to dress. But Sansa is not done. She says she did everything she was bid. She wrote the letters, and Joffrey promised mercy. She continues, noting she just wants to go home. She won't do any treason. Sansa is at a loss for words. She doesn't know what she's done. I think she might even be feeling some sort of self-doubt. Did she do something wrong that, made Joffrey angry? Why? Why would Joffrey do this to her after, he had treated her so nicely and all these things that she can remember, and he killed her father? But as she finishes, she remembers her courtesy, saying, if it pleases him. Joffrey is not happy, though, saying it does not please him. Again, Sansa is now Joffrey's plaything, that he can torture, that he can physically and mentally abuse. He's not going to give away his toys that easily. Joffrey continues stating he still has to marry her, so she will stay and obey. But Sansa does not want to marry him. He chopped off her father's head. Of course, why would you ever want to marry someone that murdered your father? And also, Joffrey's just a really piece of shit outside of the stuff that she doesn't really know yet. But Joffrey states it was a mercy. He gave him a quick and clean death. If he wasn't her father, he would have had him flayed. Really shows how much of a psychopath Joffrey really is. And this sparks Sansa to really see who Joffrey really is in his rich attire. But she notes his eyes are vain and cruel. She whispers that she hates him, something she definitely should not have said, but we see that Sansa's realizing what everybody else has realized this whole time. Ned, Arya, Jon, Robb, everyone has realized who Joffrey is besides her. She has finally realized who he is. But Joffrey hardened hearing this and says his mother told him never to strike his wife and commands Merritt to do it instead. Again, it is interesting that Cersei does try to instill upon Joffrey not to beat your wife, right? Because Cersei herself was beaten by Robert. But unfortunately, Joffrey finds a loophole. The knight was on her, blocking her hand from protecting her face, and Meryn hit her hard with a backhand that sent her falling. Remember, this is a full-grown guy in armor. He's probably 2 times bigger than Sansa. This is horrible. It also shows to Sansa that being a knight doesn't really matter in this world. There are a bunch of knights that abuse their power, their position, and we see that all throughout A Song of Ice and Fire. Joffrey asks if she will obey him now, and Sansa submits to his will. Joffrey says he will look for her in court and leaves with Aerys and Meryn, as Sandor lingers long enough to tell her to save herself some pain and give him what he wants. Sansa's not certain about what that even means. What does Joffrey actually want? The Hound notes he wants her to play the role of his sweet lady. He wants her to recite all her lessons and lines Mordain taught her, to both fear and love him. Again, it's Joffrey wanting basically a plaything, right? Someone that's completely obedient, that he can, assert his dominance and will over. He doesn't want Sansa to be herself, more or less. He doesn't want her to be an actual person. He wants her to be this character or this object, more or less. This seemed to wake Sansa up a bit as the 2 servants come in afterwards, and Sansa gets to work, making them draw a bath and hide the bruise in her face, as Joffrey would want her to be beautiful. Again, it shows that Sansa is a quick learner when she does, figure out what she needs to do. She needs to get herself prepared, trying to look as beautiful as possible. And we even get kind of another reference to Daenerys. I've talked about this Daenerys, or this Sansa chapter and the last Daenerys chapter share a lot of similarities. And this is kind of another one in terms of Daenerys and Sansa's characters. The hot water in the bath reminded her of Winterfell and gave her strength. Again, we see that exact same thing with Daenerys in terms of thinking about her dragons and her heritage of being part of Aegon the Conqueror's bloodline. She was shocked to see how filthy she was, as she had not washed since Ned's death. She did not speak to the servants, besides giving them commands. Again, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but it's incredibly smart. These are all definitely spies. She can't trust any of them. Even if she wanted to tell them what she was feeling or any of these things, she can't. Sansa has to hold it all in. She has to play this part and let no cracks really show. She can't have slip-ups like she hates Joffrey or stuff like that, or else she's going to be in much more pain. And that's something I think we also miss with the character of Sansa and Arya, because the two get compared so much on their differences. Us, the audience, of course we like Arya way more than we like Sansa at this point, because Arya, she's a bit more adult-like. It's almost unnatural how much she is like an adult. She is someone that's very rational and logical the way she thinks. That's just not the way you are when you're younger, right? When you're a child, you're still learning how the world works. And Sansa is much more humanistic in that way. As a kid, she's still trying to figure things out. She's a young adult. She's trying to figure things out. And it's much more interesting the way she gets a lesson, of how the world works. And now she takes that in, and now she's going to use that going forward. So that's one thing I've kind of looked at, because in this reread specifically of A Game of Thrones, I wanted to look at the character of Sansa, because this is her origin. It's where, a lot of that hate for the character of Sansa comes from, and trying to understand where the character is and what George is trying to do with her. And I think that's something we just overlook, the way Sansa is very human, in the way we look back at our own lives and go, yeah, we've probably had those moments when we were younger, when we were, a kid or a teenager or whatever, where we may have said something, may have done something that was kind of out of pocket, that was kind of cruel, or maybe not right, or something you regret. A lot of that's what kind of Sansa's going to feel as she grows older. When the time came, she would wear the silk green dress that she had worn on the tourney day. She had remembered how gallant Joffrey had been that day. Maybe he would treat her better than if she reminded him of that. Again, that was a day when Joffrey was very gallant. He was playing the role of the prince, of trying to court Sansa, and Sansa's trying to get him to remember that. Remember being nicer to her and things like that, which is incredibly smart as well. She's doing what a lot of women in this world do, using their fashion, using, what they're wearing to manipulate people around them to doing things that they want. We see that with Marjorie a lot. We see that with Arianne. We see that with Daenerys going forward. So it's just another thing that Sansa's kind of picking up on. But that'll get us into page 745. She drank some buttermilk and had some food to settle her stomach, and prepared until Meryn came to get her at midday. And Sansa is completely changed. She notes his splendid armor as he bowed to her, saying he was sent to escort her. And Meryn doesn't even look at her. Didn't even look at the beating he had given her in the past, how bloody she had been 3 hours past. Sansa asks if he will beat her if she refuses, and Meryn doesn't even blink an eye. Meryn asks if she is refusing, and Sansa saw him for what he was. He did not even glance at the bruise on her. He felt nothing for her. He didn't hate her or love her. He felt very indifferent to her, because Meryn is, again, just Joffrey's toy as well. Being able to just wield him to beat helpless, young girls or whatever. Meryn is kind of just cruel, and he doesn't really care who he does it to. But Sansa responds with a no, but thinks how she wants to threaten him or curse him or tell him he will be exiled when she becomes queen, but she remembers the hound's advice and says she will do whatever her grace commands. Again, Sansa's learning. She has to hold in all of these, emotions that she's having, anger, sadness, hate, all that, because it's only going to lead to more harm being done to her. Sansa then also tells Meryn that he is no true knight, and Sansa thinks the hound would have laughed at her. The other men would have scorned her or begged for forgiveness, but Meryn did not care. Meryn doesn't care about the knight's vows. It's made quite obvious. Meryn cares about his position, being maybe able to afford the luxuries of life, and keeping in good faith with the king. The balcony was deserted except for Sansa herself, but she tried to hold back her tears as she watched the sentences. 9 out of every 10 seemed to bore Joffrey, and he left his council to handle them. But when he did rule out justice, not even Cersei could sway him. Again, it just shows that Cersei just has no control over Joffrey, which is exactly why Tyrion's going to be sent to court, because Joffrey is just making a mockery of being king. He's making bad decisions. He is creating a position that's even worse for Tywin and the Lannisters to try and work around. Especially, you look at Ned's death and also Arya's escape and Barristan being allowed to escape as well and being dismissed from the Kingsguard. He's just making bad mistake after bad mistake, and part of that is also Cersei's fault as well. But that'll get us into page 746. So getting to page 746, Sansa notes a few examples. A thief that lost his hand. 2 men were having a dispute over land, and Joffrey ordered them to duel to the death for it. A woman had asked for a traitor's head as she had loved him, but Joffrey simply imprisoned her for loving a traitor, so she must be one as well. Again, you can see a theme here. Everything that revolves around Joffrey being able to do a very cruel or harsh punishment or having some sort of violence being done, he takes quite an interest in. She notes the frog-headed Janos Slynt in his fashionable attire as he nods along to anything Joffrey did. Again, Janos, we know, is just a yes-man. He's just a pathetic coward that will go with anything that his higher-ups say, no matter how cruel they are. She remembers him throwing Ned down to be executed. She wishes a hero would execute him. But this reminds her of a moment with Littlefinger in a past chapter, telling her that life is not a song, and she may learn that to her sorrow. She now knew that monsters always won. But lastly, she remembers the hound's words again to give him what he wants. So yeah, Sansa just remembering a lot of words of wisdom in terms of what the world is really like. And she knows it's going to take something else for Janos to be taken out of office. And Tyrion, interestingly enough, who is always thought to be like a monster or his villainous character, will be the monster that takes down Janos Slynt quite a bit. And then also, even more interestingly, this hero to put Janos Slynt to be executed is Jon Snow. So just a nice little moment there. I don't know if that connects maybe as good as I thought it does in my brain, but that's just something that I kind of thought of when I was kind of reading that from my notes. The last case was a singer who had made a song that mocked the queen and Robert over his duel with the pig, which seemed to refer to the queen as well. Interesting. It seems like a harmless song to me, but Joffrey doesn't see it that way. Joffrey announced he would be merciful. Joffrey being merciful, the worst thing you could possibly ever hear, and said he could keep his hands or his tongue, and he would have a day to decide. That was the last thing of the day, and as she got down from the balcony to hopefully escape, but she was met by the hound, Joffrey, and his guards. He examined her closely and noted that she looked much better today. Yeah, Joffrey just cares about appearances and all these things, and we've kind of gone over it. We've kind of beat it like a dead horse, but yeah, he just wants her to play a role. She says thank you hollowly, but this seemed to please Joffrey, as he tells her to walk with him and gives him her arm. At one point, that would have thrilled her, but now she felt disgusted to do so. He notes it will be his name day soon and asks what she is going to get him. She says uncertainly that she had not thought about it yet. And this is not what Joffrey wants to hear. One, Sansa calls him my lord, and he's now the king. And two, Joffrey's a spoiled little brat that's very selfish. So you can see where this is not going to go particularly well. Also, really, Joffrey? You're going to ask about your birthday when Sansa's been going through the worst emotional time of her life? Joffrey really is just a piece of shit. We're going to be saying that a lot, especially in book 2, because we're going to have way much more of a focus on Joffrey. This book doesn't focus on Joffrey nearly as much, but yeah, he definitely is starting to get really annoying in this first book, which is what makes him such a good villain. He corrects her, saying your grace, and says she is as stupid as mother says, which cuts deep to Sansa, because Sansa still had a deep respect for Cersei, right? Because Cersei, in a lot of ways, was kind of a role model to Sansa, and to this point, Cersei had yet to really, do anything bad to Sansa, and at this point, it was a deep cut to Sansa, which Joffrey probably knew. Cersei had always treated her kindly, and in a lot of ways, she is Sansa's role model, but she asks she does. Joffrey says that yes, she worries about their children being stupid as well. Ironic, given this is coming from Joffrey. But Joffrey tells her he is not worried, and Sansa says, thank you, your grace, and she even thinks the Hound was right. She was just repeating lines. He notes he will get her with child soon, and if their first child is stupid, he will cut off her head and find a smarter one, and asks when she will be able to birth a child. My question is, how would you even know when your child is stupid? That's such a weird thing to say, because you really don't know, when a child is going to be smart, or maybe not so smart, or just average intelligence until, quite a bit into their life, I feel like. So, just such a weird thing for Joffrey to say, because it's you would think if you're waiting 8 years to figure out, or however long it takes to figure out if a kid's smart or not, you're also going to have multiple kids by then. Joffrey's just a moron. He just doesn't think about things, I guess. I don't know. But Sansa notes that Mordain had told her most highborn girls flower at 12 or 13, and Joffrey seems pleased by this and leads her to the battlements. Sansa says no and jets away, realized where he is taking her. She knows what is on the battlements. She begins to shake and pleads to not go, and she begs him no. Joffrey calmly says he wants to show her what happens to traitors. Sansa shook her head, wildly saying she won't go, but Joffrey responds that he can have Meryn drag you, but you won't like that, so she better listen. And that gets us into page 748. If you didn't know Joffrey was a cruel bastard by now, you do now. I mean, he's going to take up the woman he's supposed to marry to go see his father's head, also everyone else she's known that's in King's Landing, and their heads being on the wall. But yeah, Joffrey offers his hand to her, but she shakes back away from him. But the Hound pushes her back and says, "Do it, girl." The rest was unsaid, but Sansa knew he would have her up there anyway, and Sansa reluctantly takes his hand. Every step felt like time stopped. The dread was growing within her. Then she was in the open. She could see Visenya's Hill, where her father was killed, the Dragon Pit, and even north where her home was. And from this point, I want to read on, because it's just insanely cruel what ends up happening next. But I do like to do these readings every chapter, so let's get into it. What are you looking at? Joffrey said. This is what I wanted you to see right here. A thick stone parapet protected the outer edge of the rampart, reaching as high as Sansa's chin, with crenellations cut into every 5 feet for archers. The heads were mounted between the crenels along the top of the walls, impaled on iron spikes so they faced out over the city. Sansa had noted them the moment she'd stepped out onto the wall walk, but the river and the bustling streets and the setting sun were ever so much prettier. He can make me look at the heads, she told herself, but he can't make me see them. This one is your father, he said. This one here. Dog, turn it around so she can see him. Sandor Clegane took the head by the hair and turned it. The severed head had been dipped in tar to preserve it longer. Sansa looked at it calmly, not seeing it at all. It did not really look like Lord Eddard, she thought. It did not even look real. How long do I have to look? Joffrey seemed disappointed. Do you want to see the rest? There was a long row of them. If it please, your grace. Joffrey marched her down the wall walk, past a dozen more heads and 2 empty spikes. I'm saving those for my Uncle Stannis and my Uncle Renly, he explained. The other heads had been dead and mounted much longer than her father. Despite the tar, most were long past being recognizable. The king pointed to one and said, "That's your septa there." But Sansa could not even have told that it was a woman. The jaw had rotted off her face, and birds had eaten one ear and most of a cheek. Sansa had wondered what had happened to Septa Mordain, although she supposed she had known all along. Why did you kill her? She asked. She was God-sworn. She was a traitor. Joffrey looked pouty. Somehow she was upsetting him. You haven't said what you mean to give me for my name day. Maybe I should give you something instead. Would you like that? And yeah, so just a lot going in as we're getting into page 749 with that quote, but a lot to kind of say here, right? Just seeing all these heads that Sansa and, people that she knew, but they don't even look like people she used to know. No, they don't really bring up any of effect in her because they don't look like anything. They're just heads to her now. They don't look like Mordain. They don't look like Ned. They don't look like any of these other people. And so one thing I will say, I'm not a big fan of Mordain. I've made that quite clear through this first book. I think she's one of the worst characters in the Song of Ice and Fire. Just the way she treats children, the way she goes about teaching people. The way Sansa is quite underprepared for the real world, and a lot of that's because of Mordain, in my opinion. Can't say I'm sad to see Mordain go like Sansa is, but maybe she didn't deserve to go out that way, I guess. Maybe she just deserved to be fired, but yeah. But we get back to this, again, part of this where just Joffrey is so worried about what Sansa's going to get him for his name day, which I think is hilarious. But at this, Sansa nods along to Joffrey giving her something, and Joffrey recalls Robb. And this goes all the way back to Arya's first chapter, where she saw the rivalry between Joffrey and Robb. Joffrey recalls Robb and how the Hound had called him the Lord of the Wooden Sword. Joffrey notes that Robb had defeated Jaime, and Cersei had wept when she had heard, and that all women are weak. Again, it shows how Joffrey is just an idiot. Like, he's just an idiot. Like, just calling all women weak. He's just an absolute moron. But, He notes that Cersei had told him they must stay here because his uncles may attack. But he does not care. He will gather a host and give her Robb Stark's head. Again, Joffrey just doesn't understand that if you leave your castle undefended, someone's going to take it. That's simple. Somebody's got to give Joffrey the art of war. But I will say that's a little bit of foreshadowing to an event that may happen in House of the Dragon. Wink, wink. But a madness took over Sansa, and she replies, maybe he will give him his. Joffrey was not pleased. Again, I wonder why he wasn't pleased, as Sansa just threatened that Joffrey was going to be killed. But Joffrey notes she must never mock him, and that gets us into page 750, where she once again is going to give a lesson about playing the lady, just playing this robot of a character while around Joffrey, having no emotion. He notes a true wife should never mock his husband and prompts Meryn to hit her again, leaving her bloody and bruised. Joffrey notes she should not cry as much. She was prettier when she smiled and laughed. Sansa, afraid Meryn would hit her again, tried to smile, but it was not enough, as he complains of the blood on her, as he complains of the blood that had made her look messy. Ironic, given he's the one that just instructed someone to hit her. You would think if you want someone pretty, you don't want them to be hit. But Joffrey's not a smart guy. She notes the outer parapet was up to her chin, but not so the inner edge. There was nothing but a 70 or 80-foot drop. She could do it, push him off. She tried to psych herself up. She didn't even care if she fell with him. It didn't matter. This all goes back to this idea that Sansa's feeling quite suicidal at this point, and the fact that she could accomplish 2 goals at the same time in her mind of, getting rid of all of this pain while also killing the person that is the reason for her pain. It seems worth it to Sansa. And she was getting ready to do so. I think Sansa would have done it if not for the Hound. The Hound seemed to read her mind as he says, "Here, girl," getting between the two and helps wipe her blood off with a surprising delicacy. But she knew the moment was gone. She thanked him and finishes the book saying she was a good girl. She knew her courtesies. That really sets up where the character's going. Sansa's realizing that she can't keep doing this. She can't keep having outbursts that are going to get in trouble, get her beaten up. She won't survive like this. She won't survive all this punishment that she's receiving. she has to play this role until she can find some way to escape or whatever. And that's how we end the character of Sansa. A really huge note. Nearly an attempted assassination on Joffrey. Joffrey's own doing, by the way, putting himself in a horrible position and also antagonizing this woman. But that's the way we end out the book for the King's Landing plot, and we'll pick up with it in Clash of Kings. But that'll get us to Daenerys 9, which we'll be doing next week. Very excited because Daenerys has been probably my second favorite character of this book outside of Ned. I've been doing kind of a rating scale, and so far I think she's second or third. I think some of her middle chapters kind of brought her underneath Catelyn for a little while, but I think her last two will probably bring her way up again. But thank you guys all for watching. I hope you guys all enjoy, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.